What's happening with the 49ers right now does not feel like that sleepy stretch of the offseason where everybody just speculates and waits. It feels like a front office getting tested. It feels like a franchise that knows it still has the roster to make real noise, but also knows one more cycle of lukewarm decisions could cost them way too much. There's talk about getting after the quarterback. There's a market opportunity that could help right away. There's a warning light flashing in pass protection, and there's even a return that could shake up the soul of this team. That is not background noise. That is the picture of a team that still believes it can chase a title. If you want to follow this kind of read with no fluff, hit subscribe, because today we're talking to the people who actually feel the weight of Santa Clara. I want to start with the thing that may define the ceiling of this defense more than anything else: the ability to make opposing quarterbacks uncomfortable without needing 1,000 Band-Aids. Because when the season tightens up, when you get into that January football where 1 or 2 snaps can flip everything, it is not enough to have recognizable names in the rotation. You need real heat. You need guys who speed up the clock, force mistakes, and wreck the other team's plan before it can even breathe. And right now, that is still one of the biggest questions hanging over this 49ers roster. That is why the TJ Parker conversation matters. Not because there is some inside report saying he will be the pick at 27. There is not. What there is, though, is something else: recurring mock draft connections and a fit that makes football sense. Parker is big, strong, long, heavy-handed, and he brings the kind of edge profile San Francisco has traditionally loved. When you see that kind of link pop up more than once, it does not have to be true to mean something. As a signal, it matters. But the real debate here is not, does he look like a 49er? He does. The real debate is, does he answer the most urgent need at the position? That is where it gets tricky. His profile leans more toward power, control, physicality, and run support than that raw first-step burst that turns tackles into traffic cones right out of the gate. In other words, he could be useful, solid, and a natural fit. But useful and solid is not always the same thing as game-changing right now. And that difference matters a lot for the 49ers in this moment. A rebuilding team can choose comfort, gradual development, and a medium-term bet. A contender under pressure does not think that way. It thinks about immediate complement, instant impact, and fixing what is missing now, not just what might be missing a year or two from now. If Parker really is a strong target, that would say a lot about how this front office sees the board. It would say San Francisco may still lean more toward familiar identity than toward adding a different kind of weapon to the pass rush. That is not an automatic knock on the player. It is a challenge to the team's timing. Because the real question is not about isolated talent, it is about priority. What do the 49ers want to buy with a premium pick? Safety inside a mold they already know, or a piece that changes the way this front attacks? That decision matters more than the name itself. And once the draft starts raising that question, the next step almost asks itself: if the future offers one possible answer, does the present still have a more immediate one sitting out there? And that is where the conversation leaves the projection board and steps into the kind of territory contenders love to work in: market opportunity. Because sure, a draft pick can help a lot, but there is a huge difference between developing a rookie and adding somebody who already knows the league, can handle meaningful snaps, and can walk into the building as a practical answer. That is where Jadeveon Clowney starts making sense in this 49ers conversation. Again, let's set the record straight. There is no confirmed deal, no report saying San Francisco is closing in. What there is a scenario that adds up. There is need on the edge. There is a veteran available. There is a recent connection with Matt Eberflus. And there is also a price point that completely changes the tone of the conversation. Once Joey Bosa was basically cooled off because of cost, it became obvious the 49ers were not going to attack this market on impulse. So if a much more affordable option shows up, the door swings open in a different way. And to me, that is the heart of it. Clowney would not be coming in as a headline. He would be coming in as a tool. Third down snaps, mature rotation help, physical presence, real experience, and support for a unit that cannot spend the whole season living off projection or praying every recovery goes perfectly at the same time. A move like that might not be the flashiest thing on the offseason menu, but it gives you something contenders respect more than hype: immediate function. There is also the Eberflus factor, and it matters. His arrival was met with plenty of skepticism. So if a recent connection from that world can turn into a viable reinforcement for a real need, that changes the way people see the hire. Not because it erases his past, but because it turns a questionable bet into a potentially useful piece of the puzzle. In the NFL, that kind of bridge can mean more than a shiny name on paper. Now, no fantasy football stuff here. Clowney would not be some miracle move. He is not a one-man fix, and he should not be sold like one. But he does not need to be that to make sense. For a team under pressure to win, the best signing is not always the sexiest one. A lot of times it is the one that fits the roster, fits the budget, and lowers the risk without blowing up the whole plan. And that is exactly why this possibility matters. Because it forces San Francisco to show whether it is just monitoring the offseason or actually willing to strike while the market still offers a real lane. And once that question shows up, it crashes right into another pressure point on this roster. If the defense needs tuning, the offense needs sturdier protection too. On the other side of the ball, the most serious conversation might be the one that gets less attention outside the fan base, but means everything inside the building. How much do the 49ers actually trust what they have on the interior of the offensive line right now? Because a contender can survive one question mark, maybe two. But once uncertainty starts creeping into pass protection, pocket stability, and the ability to keep the offense balanced and physical, the bill comes due. And it comes due in the exact games where structure matters most. That is why Joel Bitonio enters this conversation with so much weight, even without being some wild, explosive rumor. His name is being floated as a market possibility if he decides to keep playing, and that alone shifts the debate. Because now you are not talking about a player who needs to be molded. You are talking about a veteran coming off a full season, full snap volume, and respectable pass protection. That is not a side note. That is ready-made stability. And stability at this point is gold for San Francisco. Not because the team needs to give up on internal development, but because the competitive clock does not wait for everybody to develop at the same time. If this franchise still sees itself as a real contender, then it makes perfect sense to look at a veteran who could reduce volatility right away. This is not the kind of move that sells jerseys. It is the kind of move that prevents a quiet collapse over the course of the season. There is also a strategic message in an idea like this. If the 49ers really are evaluating someone like Bitonio, the message is simple. The plan is not just to hope the answer emerges from inside the building. The plan would be to give the roster a layer of protection strong enough to support immediate ambition. That is how a team with an open title window thinks. That is how a team acts when it knows it cannot afford to waste a season waiting for every answer to appear naturally. But there is an obvious break on the hype. First, he has to decide he even wants to play. And even if he does, not every plausible solution becomes a real move. Still, the fact that a name like this fits the need so cleanly tells you everything about the pressure inside the building. Because once the conversation moves from, let's test some options, to, maybe it is time to go get somebody proven, the whole thing levels up. The truth is, this is not just about guard play. It is about posture. It is about how far the 49ers are willing to go to protect the offense and keep this team standing tall when the season gets ugly. And once the franchise starts getting challenged like that on both lines, the next part becomes even more interesting. What happens when the answer does not come from the market at all, but from the team's own identity? That is where Dre Greenlaw changes the temperature of this whole conversation. Because after talking draft, market moves, and veteran line help, this story brings in something else. Belonging. And I think the 49ers need to pay real attention to that. Not every meaningful answer comes from outside the building. Sometimes what gets a team back in rhythm is getting back a player who understands the tone of the locker room, the standard of the house, and the kind of football this team wants to play when it is truly operating like a contender. The strongest part of this story is that it is not just our interpretation. Greenlaw himself spoke publicly about how unhappy he was in Denver, how difficult it was to come back without feeling fully right, and how uncomfortable it was trying to live in a role that never really fit. That part is confirmed. The interpretation comes after that. Not every exit is growth, and not every fresh start gives a player the right environment to become himself again. In San Francisco, Greenlaw already knows the ground beneath his feet. That matters. Because at the end of the day, he represents more than a position. He represents competitive identity. He represents intensity. He represents real chemistry with Fred Warner. And with the defensive personality this fan base connects to the team's best recent version. For a roster under pressure, getting that kind of piece back is almost like getting back a language the team already speaks. You are not just bringing back a linebacker. You are trying to restore part of the personality that shows up when the calendar starts getting mean. Of course, there is a fair reason to pump the brakes, the physical side of it. His time in Denver showed exactly how availability changes everything. So it would be irresponsible to sell this return as guaranteed top-level impact. But it would also be a mistake to treat it like some feel-good side story. Just having him back changes the vibe of the roster discussion. It shows that Santa Clara is not only looking for new answers, it is also trying to reconnect with parts of its own DNA. And that fits the thesis of this whole script perfectly. The 49ers do not just need to stack names, they need to make decisions that leave this team more ready, more stable, and more connected to the kind of identity that can survive a title chase. Now I want to hear from you. What matters more in this offseason? Going out and getting immediate help on the market, or fully restoring the competitive edge of this roster from within? Drop your take, because I want to see who is thinking about right now and who is thinking about what keeps this team alive all the way into January. When you put all of it together, the read gets heavy in a very specific way. The draft brings a profile dilemma. The market offers a realistic pass rush option. The offensive line is asking for a grown man answer. And the return of a key piece reminds everybody that contenders also need identity, not just replacement parts. These are different paths, with different roles, but they all lead to the same door. The 49ers are still in the big race, but now they need to move with the urgency that status demands. So the conversation is not about whether this roster has talent. It does. The conversation is whether this franchise is going to treat this moment like a real chance to attack the present, or just like another ordinary offseason. And I want to close on this. In your eyes, what shows more championship ambition right now? Going after immediate reinforcements, or trusting that this current blueprint only needs a few small tweaks? Because in Santa Clara right now, the clock is not asking for patience, it is asking for conviction.